In the long, dark history of submarine warfare, one rule was absolute: never fight a destroyer. A submarine is a ghost in the water, hunting slow, lumbering cargo ships, the lifeblood of an enemy's war machine. But the destroyer. The destroyer is the wolf, fast, deadly, built to hunt the hunter. During World War II, if a Japanese destroyer found an American submarine, it usually meant death. By early 1944, Japanese destroyers had sunk 14 U.S. subs in combat. And in that same period, not a single Japanese destroyer had ever been sunk by an American submarine in a direct fight. The math was simple. A destroyer raced at 35 knots. A submerged sub could barely reach 9. Destroyers had sonar, depth charges. The submarine had to hide, blind and silent. The doctrine was clear. If a destroyer finds you, you dive, run silent, and pray. But in 1944, one man decided to break every rule. Commander Samuel D. He didn't just fight the wolf, he hunted it. And in just 4 days, he and his 79 men sank 5 Japanese ships. The Imperial Navy was stunned. The Pacific War would never be the same. This is the story of the USS Harter, the destroyer killer, and the man who turned the hunter into the hunted. Commander Samuel Day wasn't born a hero. He was forged by the Navy, a 1930 Naval Academy graduate. He spent over a decade mastering submarines, learning every trick of stealth, navigation, and tactics. By 1944, he was 37 years old, seasoned, calm under pressure, and obsessed with one thing: outsmarting the enemy. The Pacific was a deadly chessboard. Japanese supply lines stretched across thousands of miles, carrying fuel, weapons, and troops. Their convoys were heavily defended, often escorted by the fastest, deadliest ships in the fleet. Destroyers? For most submariners, engaging a convoy head-on was suicide. Most preferred shadowing cargo ships, waiting for an easy target. But D saw opportunity in danger. The USS Harter was small but lethal. Every inch of the sub was a tool in D's hands. Every crew member trained for precision. Sonar operators scanned for echoes. Torpedo men loaded and reloaded with surgical timing. Lookouts strained against the waves. Everyone knew the stakes. One mistake, the sea would swallow them whole as they set out on their patrol. Intelligence reports warned of Japanese destroyers experimenting with new anti-sub tactics. Mines, sonar sweeps, coordinated attacks. It was a nightmare scenario. Yet, Da's mind was already 3 steps ahead. He charted courses through narrow straits, planned ambushes near choke points, and prepared his crew to do the impossible. By the time the USS Harter slipped beneath the waves, the tension was electric. Every creak of the hull, every shadow on the water, could signal the end. And somewhere, just beyond the horizon, the wolves were waiting. The USS Harter cut through the dark waters of the Pacific, silent as a shadow. Commander Samuel D knew the Japanese were out there, destroyers patrolling, escorting supply convoys. Everyone a potential death sentence. Every crew member felt the tension. Their nerves were taut, eyes scanning sonar, ears listening for the slightest hint of propeller noise. One false move, one early ping, and the Harter would be torn apart. The first encounter came sooner than expected. A lone cargo ship appeared on the horizon, escorted by a destroyer that sliced through the waves like a blade. Most submarine commanders would have waited, hoping for a safer opportunity. Not Day. He saw a pattern in the destroyer's maneuvers, an opening, and he acted. Prepare torpedoes. He ordered, voice calm, betraying none of the storm inside him. The crew moved with precision, each man a practiced part of the deadly machine that was the USS Harter. The torpedo tubes were loaded, angles calculated. the timing measured to perfection as the Harter silently slipped into position. The destroyer's searchlights swept the water, narrowly missing the sub's periscope. For a heartbeat, everything hung in balance. One wrong move, and the Harter would be history. Then, the torpedoes launched. The sea erupted in fire as the cargo ship exploded, sending flames and debris skyward. The destroyer scrambled, trying to locate the sub. But D had already vanished beneath the waves. The next day, the pattern repeated. 2 more ships were spotted, each with heavy escorts. D calculated every approach with the precision of a chess master, choosing currents, shadows, and Japanese overconfidence against them. One destroyer nearly spotted them, depth charges detonating dangerously close. The sub shook under the concussions, alarms blaring. Yet the crew stayed silent, disciplined, trusting their captain completely. Within hours, another ship joined the tally of the dead. By the 3rd day, Japanese commanders were desperate. Radio warnings were sent, patrols intensified, destroyers scoured the waters. Every convoy became a gauntlet, yet the Harter moved like a phantom, attacking, evading, reappearing when least expected. D pushed the boundaries of doctrine, taking risks that would have terrified any other captain. The men aboard the Harter began to feel invincible, but they knew that luck was only part of the equation. D's brilliance, planning, and the crew's flawless execution made them deadly. By nightfall of the 4th day, 5 Japanese ships had been sunk. The once impossible feat was complete, leaving shockwaves in both the U.S. Navy and the Imperial Japanese Fleet in 4 days. The rules of submarine warfare had been rewritten. The Hunter had become the ultimate predator. The Japanese destroyers, trained to annihilate subs, had become prey. And the legend of the USS Harter, the destroyer killer, was born by the 4th day. The USS Harter had already made history, but the true test was about to begin. Intelligence had reported a heavily defended Japanese convoy moving through a narrow strait, a moving fortress bristling with destroyers, armed transports, and anti-subnet sensors. For any other submarine, this would have been suicide. For Commander Samuel K., it was a challenge he could not ignore. The Harter slipped silently beneath the waves, its dark hull barely disturbing the water's surface. Every man aboard was acutely aware of the danger. Sonar operators strained to pick up enemy movements, listening to the low hum of the convoy's engines, the churning blades of the destroyers patrolling above. The tension was suffocating, yet within the sub, there was calm. A disciplined focus that only came from absolute trust in their captain. The first destroyer passed directly above the Harter. Its sonar swept the waters, searching for anomalies, for any sign of a hidden predator. D held his breath, knowing that a single ping, a single ripple in the water, could end the patrol and their lives. The seconds stretched, the destroyer's shadow looming large through the periscope. Then it passed, unaware of the ghost beneath it. D struck with precision. Torpedoes launched, slicing silently through the water, finding their marks. One Japanese transport erupted in flames, sinking within minutes. The convoy scrambled, depth charges detonating dangerously close, shaking the heart violently. Crew members gripped rails, bracing against the concussions. Every alarm, every echo of underwater explosives was a reminder of the razor-thin margin between life and death, as the Harter dove deeper to evade counterattacks. D analyzed the remaining targets. The destroyers were clever, aggressive, coordinating their movements to trap the sub. But does tactical brilliance turn their strength into a weakness? He maneuvered the Harter in unpredictable patterns, striking from unexpected angles, using the terrain of the strait, the currents, and the shadows to confuse the enemy. One destroyer came dangerously close. Sonar sweeping, depth charges falling like rain around the sub. The hull shuddered under the force, and the crew held their positions with nerves of steel. D made a daring decision, bringing the Harter into a tight undercurrent zone, moving directly beneath the destroyer. With seconds to spare, another torpedo fired, and another Japanese ship joined the tally. By the end of the encounter, the convoy was in chaos. The Japanese commanders could barely comprehend what had just happened. 5 ships sunk in 4 days, and now an entire convoy shattered in the strait. The Harter had not only survived, it had dominated. For Commander Samuel D. and his crew, the impossible had become reality. They had faced the wolves at their fiercest and emerged victorious. In that moment, the destroyer killer had earned its name. And the Pacific War would never view submarine warfare in the same way again. The Imperial Japanese Navy could hardly believe the reports coming in. 5 ships sunk in just 4 days. Entire convoys shattered. Experienced destroyer captains were left questioning everything they thought they knew about anti-submarine warfare. Their sonar sweeps, their depth charges, their carefully coordinated attacks, all had failed against a single American submarine. Across the Pacific, Japanese intelligence officers pored over intercepted communications, searching for answers. How could one submarine penetrate their defenses so effectively? How could it evade destroyers trained specifically to hunt subs? Panic rippled through the ranks. Orders were issued to reroute convoys, to strengthen escorts, and to deploy additional destroyers. But even their best efforts yielded little success. The Harter seemed to appear where no sub should be, striking with precision and disappearing without a trace. Meanwhile, aboard the USS Harter, the crew remained focused. The exhilaration of their success was tempered by the knowledge that danger had not disappeared. Every encounter, every torpedo fired, had brought them closer to discovery. Commander Samuel D. knew the Japanese would not allow such audacity to go unanswered. They would regroup, adapt, and return with a vengeance. The Harter's next patrols would demand even more cunning and nerve. The psychological impact on the Japanese was profound. Destroyer captains spoke in hushed tones of the destroyer killer, a phantom sub that had turned the rules of naval warfare on their head. Fear spread, rumors circulated, and even seasoned officers admitted that the U.S. Navy had produced a strategist who operated at a level they could not anticipate. Morale, once steady, wavered in the face of this invisible predator. For the men aboard the Harter, the story was different. They had grown accustomed to living on the knife's edge, but each encounter reminded them how close death really was. The roar of depth charges, the shuddering of the hull, the occasional flicker of sonar echoes, these were reminders that survival was never guaranteed. Yet, under DA's leadership, they had achieved the impossible. They had rewritten history, and so, the stage was set. The Harter had proven itself against the enemy's best, but the war was far from over. Japanese commanders were adapting, devising new tactics, and preparing for the next encounter. The Pacific had become a hunting ground, but this time, the hunter was the hunted. And the world was about to witness a submarine campaign unlike any other. The immediate impact of the USS Harter's 4-day campaign was staggering. Japanese supply lines, already stretched thin across the Pacific, were thrown into chaos. 5 vital ships lost in less than a week meant fuel shortages, delayed reinforcements, and disrupted logistics. Ports scrambled to redirect convoys, and military planners realized that a single, highly skilled submarine could undermine months of strategic planning. News of the Harter's success spread quickly through the U.S. Navy. Commander Samuel D. and his crew became legends overnight. D himself remained humble, emphasizing the training, coordination, cue and bravery of his men rather than his own tactical brilliance. But the Navy understood. The Harter was not just a submarine. It was a symbol of American ingenuity and determination in the Pacific theater. The crew, still bracing for the next encounter, could finally feel a measure of pride. Every officer and enlisted man aboard had executed a flawless campaign under extreme pressure. They had faced destroyers, wolves of the sea, and lived to tell the tale. Every torpedo launched, every evasive maneuver, every silent glide beneath the waves had been a carefully orchestrated act of courage. Their success reinforced the importance of preparation, discipline, and trust in leadership. For the Japanese, the lessons were painful but unavoidable. Naval commanders convened emergency meetings to analyze how a single U.S. submarine had defeated multiple destroyers, sinking cargo ships and evading capture. The answer was clear: underestimating the enemy, relying on outdated tactics, and failing to anticipate creative, unpredictable strategies could no longer be tolerated. Convoys were rerouted, anti-submarine training intensified, and the destroyer killer became a name spoken with a mixture of fear and respect. Strategically, the Harter's success had a ripple effect. Other U.S. submarines began adopting DH's methods, emphasizing stealth, deception, and precision attacks over sheer aggression. The campaign demonstrated that a small, highly trained team could inflict disproportionate damage on a much larger force. It reshaped naval doctrine, proving that in the vast Pacific, intelligence, ingenuity, and daring could outweigh numbers and firepower by the end of those 4 days. The USS Harter had done more than sink ships. It had rewritten the rules of engagement in submarine warfare. The psychological blow to the Japanese Navy, combined with the operational disruption, made clear that the war in the Pacific was no longer just a battle of fleets. It was a battle of minds, tactics, and nerve. And in this battle, Samuel Day and his crew had emerged victorious, leaving a legacy that would echo across the Pacific for the R. Nodapo's historic 4-day rampage was only temporary. By the 7th day of the patrol, the USS Harter found itself facing a challenge unlike any before. Japanese intelligence had learned of the submarine's audacious attacks, and a new, heavily armed task force of destroyers had been dispatched. Their mission was clear: find the Harter and obliterate it before it could strike again. Denew the danger immediately. The sonar blips revealed multiple fast-moving destroyers converging on their position. Each one was a wolf, trained to hunt subs, and together they formed a coordinated pack. The Harter's crew braced themselves as the first destroyer passed overhead, sonar sweeping like a deadly heartbeat. Every second counted. Every miscalculation could be fatal. Dive. Silent running. Debarked. The submarine plunged deep, engines barely audible, hull trembling under the pounding of depth charges exploding nearby. Water pressure pushed against the hull. Alarms screamed in the control room. That the crew felt the sub shake as if it were a living creature in pain. But D remained calm, plotting their escape while planning a counterstrike. Using the currents of the narrow channel, D maneuvered the Harter beneath the destroyers, exploiting blind spots in their sonar coverage. One destroyer, confident it had tracked the sub, unleashed a torrent of depth charges. The explosions rocked the Harter violently, flooding compartments with vibration and fear. Yet D guided the sub with precision, twisting and turning like a phantom. Then, with nerves of steel, he executed a daring ambush. Torpedoes fired from the depths, striking one of the lead destroyers. Flames and debris erupted from the vessel, lighting the dark water with chaos. The remaining destroyers frantically searched, trying to regain the upper hand, but D anticipated every maneuver. With a combination of stealth, skill, and intuition, the Harter slipped through their grasp, striking again at a vulnerable transport before vanishing into the deep. The crew, battered but exhilarated, knew they had survived the unthinkable. Every man aboard understood the razor-thin line they had walked between life and death. The Harter had faced the fiercest hunters of the Pacific and emerged victorious once more by the time the dust settled. The legend of the destroyer killer had grown even larger. The Japanese Navy, now fully aware of the Harter's capabilities, scrambled to adapt, but the fear of the unseen predator lingered. For the crew, this near disaster was a testament to their training, trust in their captain, and the extraordinary combination of skill and courage that had carried them through the most harrowing days of the war. The news of the USS Harter's latest exploits reached Japanese naval headquarters like a thunderclap. 5 ships sunk in 4 days was already unheard of, but now, with the Harter surviving a deadly ambush by multiple destroyers, panic set in. Experienced commanders whispered about a ghost in the water, a sub that seemed to anticipate their every move. The term destroyer killer began circulating among officers, spoken with equal parts fear and disbelief. Convoy routes were hastily altered, new escort protocols imposed, and extra destroyers dispatched to hunt the submarine down. Yet for all their planning, nothing seemed to work. The Harter moved like a shadow, appearing where least expected, striking suddenly, and vanishing into the deep. Every Japanese captain knew that a single mistake could cost lives, ships, and even entire supply lines. Meanwhile, D and his crew observed from beneath the waves, calm and disciplined. They were acutely aware of the heightened danger. The Japanese were adapting, learning from previous encounters, and each new move meant the Harter had to be even more precise. But Commander D thrived on this tension. Every patrol, every attack, was a test of strategy, nerve, and timing. The crew trusted him implicitly, knowing that their survival and success depended on his brilliance. On the surface, Japanese officers scrambled to understand what they were facing. Intelligence reports were poured over with urgency. Convoys that once sailed confidently were now terrified of every shadow. Each destroyer captain faced sleepless nights, haunted by the knowledge that somewhere beneath the waves, the Harter waited. Morale wavered, confusion spread, and the fear of the unseen predator began to dominate their strategic decisions. Back aboard the Harter, crew prepared for the next strike. Every maneuver, every torpedo tube loaded, was executed with exacting precision. The danger was real, the threat immense, but so was the reward. Day's audacity had given them an edge, and he was determined to maintain it. The Pacific had become a chessboard, with Commander Samuel moving his pieces with unmatched skill. The Japanese Navy had learned that brute force alone could not stop a submarine that combined cunning, courage, and discipline. And as the Harter glided silently through the dark waters, one thought prevailed among both the hunter and the hunted. The war in the Pacific would never be the same. The long-term impact of the USS Harter's campaign became clear in the weeks that followed. Japanese supply lines, already fragile, were severely disrupted. Every convoy rerouted to avoid the phantom subface delays, shortages, and vulnerability. Fuel, weapons, and crucial materials no longer moved efficiently across the Pacific. The Imperial Navy had been forced onto the defensive, adjusting tactics not just for the Harter, but for the very idea that a single submarine could rewrite the rules of engagement. American naval officers studied the Harter's maneuvers with admiration. Commander Day's actions became a blueprint for submarine warfare, a demonstration of how intelligence, patience, and tactical daring could achieve outsized results. The Navy recognized that the combination of a disciplined crew and an innovative commander could be more lethal than overwhelming numbers or brute force. On the Japanese side, morale eroded. Reports of the destroyer killer spread from fleet to fleet, instilling fear that seemed almost supernatural. Even the most seasoned destroyer captains began to question their training, their strategies, and their understanding of submarine tactics. Convoys became slower, more cautious, and more predictable, ironically, making them even more vulnerable to other American submarines employing similar strategies. For the crew of the Harter, the psychological weight of their success was profound. They had survived near-death encounters, executed daring attacks under impossible odds, and emerged victorious against some of the Pacific's most skilled naval forces. Yet they remained vigilant. Every mission was a reminder that in the deep, silence was survival, and confidence could never turn into complacency. The campaign also reshaped the broader conduct of submarine warfare in the Pacific. Commanders began emphasizing ambushes, clever positioning, and deceptive tactics rather than direct confrontation. DAS Patrol proved that when strategy and courage were applied with precision, a small team could outmaneuver even the most formidable opponents. The Harter's legacy inspired countless other submarine crews to adopt similar techniques, creating a ripple effect that would be felt throughout the war by the time the USS Harter returned to port. Its reputation was cemented. Newspapers, intelligence reports, and naval briefings referred to it as the destroyer killer, a submarine that had not only sunk 5 ships in 4 days, but had also demonstrated a new era of naval strategy. Commander Samuel D. and his crew had changed the course of the war in the Pacific, proving that audacity, skill, and determination could defy expectations and strike fear into even the most power when the USS Harter finally returned to port. The crew stepped onto solid ground as heroes. The stories of their 4-day campaign, 5 Japanese ships sunk, deadly destroyers outwitted, and near-impossible escapes had already spread across the Pacific and back home. Newspapers, naval briefings, and whispered conversations among sailors all spoke of the destroyer killer and its fearless captain, Samuel DeFordy. The accolades were never about personal glory. He praised the crew, recognizing that every torpedo fired, every maneuver executed under pressure, and every moment of courage had been a collective effort. 79 men, trained, disciplined, and fearless, had turned a single submarine into a legend. Their actions had not only disrupted enemy supply lines, but had shifted the very way naval warfare would be conducted in the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Navy, meanwhile, struggled to recover. Convoys were delayed, routes altered, and commanders haunted by the shadow of a submarine that seemed to defy logic. The psychological blow lingered long after the Harter vanished beneath the waves, leaving a permanent mark on Japanese naval operations years later. Historians would study the Harter's patrol as a masterclass in submarine strategy, risk management, and tactical ingenuity. Commander Samuel Day's daring approach, the crew's flawless execution, and their relentless courage became the stuff of legend. In a war defined by massive fleets and devastating battles, it was a single submarine and its determined crew that proved that one well-executed operation could change the course of a campaign. The Harter had hunted the hunter, rewritten the rules, and etched its name into history. In the vast, treacherous waters of the Pacific, a ghost had emerged, one that would never be forgotten.